This episode is presented by Recovery Centers of Montana.
If you or someone you know is struggling, getting help shouldn't feel out of reach.
Recovery Centers of Montana offers care across 6 locations, including inpatient facilities and outpatient clinics.
Step away from the noise and focus on getting your life back on track.
Learn more by calling 701-401-3000.
That's 701-401-3000.
The North Dakota oil and natural gas industry works here, and works here, and here, and even works here, by creating 60,000 jobs statewide and generating billions of tax dollars annually to support our infrastructure, flood protection projects, and our schools. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities.
Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org.
Hi, I'm Megan Invick with Americans for Prosperity North Dakota. One of the cornerstones of our Road to Opportunity agenda is tax relief, because North Dakotans deserve to keep more of what they earn. That's why we're advocating for the elimination of the state income tax, along with meaningful property tax relief tied to responsible local spending. Learn more about the Road to Opportunity and our plan to eliminate the state income tax at afpnd.org.
Hey everyone, welcome to Plain Talk. Before we get started, we have Chris from the Forum for some North Dakota trivia. Chris?
Among all North Dakotans, Andy Heck has appeared in the most what?
The most Medora musicals.
The most Olympics?
Nope. But it is I guess it's a profession. He's a professional athlete. This was 1989.
The most Super Bowls? I don't know. Is he a football player?
Rob, I'm going to give you credit on this one. Andy Heck has appeared in the most NFL games.
Oh,
He's appeared in 185 NFL games. Starting in 1989, he was in Seattle for 5 seasons, played for Chicago for 5 seasons, and then Washington for 2 seasons.
That is crazy. I've never heard of Andy Heck.
We are bad North Dakotans, Chad.
Speak for yourself.
But now you've learned. And if you like learning more about the great state of North Dakota, as all of us do, consider a subscription to the Forum. Visit inforum.com/subscribe for our introductory rate of just $6 for 6 months. Now, on to Plain Talk.
That was a great segue, Chris. That's why Chris Kurzman is a pro in the business.
Absolute pro.
Oh, stop.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center. I'm left of center. Both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay. I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk. I got to tell you, I'm so happy to be back. I ended up missing last week. You know, every once in a while, we take some time off. I ended up getting really sick last week. I had a migraine that lasted for a week, and then I couldn't sleep. I didn't sleep for like 5 days. It was absolutely horrendous, but feeling better now. Glad to be back at it. And Oban, I'll tell you what, I missed a couple of shows because I wasn't feeling well. Oban misses all the time, so I like my attendance record over his. He's probably going to listen to this and text me unhappy about that. Anyway, today's guest co-host is Allison Ritter. She is the executive director of the Western Dakota Energy Association, and she's actually guest hosting live from, well, I guess not live, we're recording this for you people, but she's at the Williston Basin Petroleum Conference. Allison, thanks for doing this, first of all.
I'm so excited. You and I have known each other for a very, very long time, and we have great
I think when I was requesting comment and stuff when you were working at the Department of Mineral Resources.
That's right. My oil days go back to 2011, where I started at the state's oil and gas division and helped plan this conference. Actually, I was a big part of helping plan this conference, used this room for educational opportunities, and then now here I am 14, 15 years later as the executive director of the Western Dakota Energy Association, which for those people that don't know, we represent the county, cities, and school districts impacted by oil, gas, and coal development. So very appropriate that I'm here.
Yeah, and a very important constituency. That's there where the rubber hits the road when we talk about our, I guess it's not a boom anymore. It hasn't been a boom in a long time, but our very active oil play. Our guest for this show is Charles Gorecki. He is the CEO of the Energy and Environmental Research Center at the University of North Dakota. He's been there. You were telling me before the show, what, about 20 years now you've been there?
Yeah, 19 years this fall. I've been at the EERC and about 7 years as the CEO.
Well, let's get this out of the way. We were planning on having you on anyway, but we got a headline about some layoffs at the EERC due to some timing issues with funding. How are things going with all that?
Yeah, it was a really difficult decisions that had to be made due to delays in funding and trying to realign with our partner priorities. So through no fault of their own, we had to lay off some very talented staff at the EERC. Fortunately, fortunately, through the University of North Dakota, we're hopefully able to place a lot of them within the university ecosystem through this process. And then we're working really hard to get the furloughed employees back to the EERC as quickly as possible.
Do you expect any sort of an impact to operations or programming or anything because of that?
No, I mean, it certainly makes us leaner. We had to reduce staffing in general across the board, makes us leaner, but we're still ready and able to react to the needs of our partners, industry, state, federal government, with respect to advancing the energy technologies that really benefit the people of North Dakota, the United States. So we're still here. We're still ready to react and respond and happy to do so to move those energy technologies forward.
Yeah, you guys work on a tremendous amount of projects in the state. You really are the go-to when it comes to research in the state. And I mean, talk about maybe just broadly some of the things that you work on, just so people understand. I mean, particularly it relates to the oil and gas industry, but just broadly, what do you guys work on? Set that stage.
Yeah, I mean, we have an enormous vision to lead the world in developing solutions to energy and environmental challenges, which really encompasses everything. So what improves the quality of life of the people? I mean, we know that energy, and abundant energy, reliable energy improves quality of life, increases life expectancy. The things that we work on, certainly oil and gas, power production, grid reliability, rare earth elements, critical materials, hydrogen, biofuels, energy storage technologies. The list goes on and on. Certainly a big part of what we work on is related to oil and gas, being it's the number one industry in the state of North Dakota. We're the number 3 oil producer in the United States and contribute a huge amount to the global ecosystem with respect to oil and gas.
So when Rob invited me to do the show, I've told you that you were at the very top of my list as someone that I wanted to have on because of how much work you guys do. And the work you do is vitally important to my membership, because if we are not figuring out ways to continue and improve and make oil and gas production more efficient, then the revenues and the quality of life and the things in Western North Dakota and the state as a whole, actually, those will diminish. And so the work that you guys do is incredibly important, particularly when it comes to the field of EOR. And so you
Great.
hosted and you were a panelist, and I should say enhanced oil recovery. We love our acronyms in the oil and gas industry. And
yeah, we gotta make sure we're talking for people outside the oil and gas
Yes,
industry.
I know.
These are the people who are listening to the show.
Right. I mean, we love our acronyms in the oil and gas industry, but enhanced oil recovery. And you hosted a panel on that yesterday, and you called it the most important panel of the conference. Tell me why.
Absolutely. So I kind of started that whole session with talking about how much oil we've produced to date. And I'm wearing a pin right now that celebrates the fact that oil and gas industry has been going on for 75 years now in the state of North Dakota. And through that 75 years, we've produced almost 8 billion barrels of oil. Okay, so over 5.5 billion barrels of oil have been produced from the Bakken and Three Forks formation. And most of that has happened in the last 20 years. But before that, we produced almost 2 billion barrels of oil out of the Madison and about 15 other horizons inside of North Dakota. So we produced a massive amount of oil and gas, and that has led to billions of dollars in tax revenue. The number one biggest recipient of oil and gas production in the state of North Dakota is the people of North Dakota. 10% of every single barrel goes to the taxes, and it's the single largest source of tax revenue to the state. So we're at 1.2 million barrels of oil production today in the Bakken, primary production, producing oil and gas under its own power. But the next stage, as we continue to do that, pressure drops down, but most of the oil is still in the ground. So this enormous number I talked about, almost 8 billion barrels, over 7.5 billion barrels produced out of the Williston Basin in North Dakota, is a tiny fraction. There's probably somewhere north of 300 billion to maybe 1 trillion barrels of oil in the ground. So when you just do the quick math on that, we've produced a couple percent. So it would be unheard of that we would have drilled those wells, found the resource, and then not done something to produce those next barrels. So enhanced oil recovery or improved oil recovery, there's some nuance there, is a process by which you would inject something into the ground where you've produced that oil to make it flow more easily, because most of that oil is still there. So we heard about a bunch of different producers who are trying different techniques to, we call it crack the code 2.0.
Yeah, there's a lot of money that's been put in towards this. And it's not just looking at the Bakken, it's looking at those other horizons that you mentioned. What's really interesting to me is that we've talked so much about, carbon sequestration, CO2, but you got halfway through that panel before carbon dioxide even came a mention. So there's different technologies. My main question to you, because we talked about this when I was working at the oil and gas division, is why is it taking so long? Why is this so hard to do?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to do enhanced oil recovery. There's a lot of challenge. I've talked about CO2 being the thing that we need in massive quantities, hundreds of billions of tons to really unlock the Bakken. But in the meantime, things that are maybe lower hanging fruit or easier to get implemented from a whole host of things, not to mention the economics of it, produce gas, rich gas, surfactants. Basically, think of that like soap, putting that down in the reservoir to basically wash the oil off of the rock. Those things can be tried first, easier, and the lessons that we gain from that can help us understand how we might roll out in a big way enhanced oil recovery across a basin where we need something like 100 million tons of CO2 per year to really see that go. And that is a mind-blowing number. It probably doesn't even, it's hard to comprehend how much CO2 that is. And maybe for context, our coal-fired power plants in the state of North Dakota produce annually about 30 million tons of CO2. So it would take all of the coal-fired power plant CO2 emissions captured times 3 or more to really unlock the Bakken with enough working fluid to enhance that recovery, to have what we would consider basically volumetrically a second boom in the Bakken.
One thing that was talked about was that CO2 could be kind of tricky when it comes to wellbore integrity. That makes things tricky, but it also takes a lot of infrastructure. And as someone who represents an association that has seen a lot of infrastructure build out, there may be some, hesitation to say more. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's tax revenue that will come in from that infrastructure. The ERC was just awarded some funds from the Industrial Commission to look at studying the infrastructure. So what are you trying to do there?
Yeah, the larger Crack the Code 2.0 program is bigger than just the pilots and how it might work in the field. It would look at everything from, how it works at a single well site to multiple DSUs or drill spacing units. Speaking of acronyms, these are the areas that are set up to put in wells. Everything from that aspect to the midstream portion. So that's who collects the gas and the oil, separates it out, sends it to market. They would have to play a part in this. It also comes down to where the CO2 comes from. So if it's coming from coal-fired power plants, there's the infrastructure that needs to take place at those plants to capture it and then transport it, most likely via pipeline from those power plants to the oil and gas production areas, and what that exactly looks like. So it's unclear. We need to learn through these pilots of what it looks like in the field, what that looks like scaled up, and then have the midstream operators at the table. So how they're going to handle the flow of CO2 back to their gas processing units, or where it's going to be separated out and then re-injected into the oil and gas fields. It's the pipeline infrastructure, where that would come from, if there is pipelines within the state, and then how it's captured from the plant. So it's a whole ecosystem, if you will, that would need to be implemented to execute Crack the Code 2.0.
But one thing you and I
We
had talked
obviously have, and I know you were talking about. I know one thing that you had talked about with enhanced oil recovery was that there's possibly other mechanisms. Carbon isn't necessarily the one. But when I talked to some other industry leaders, we had Ron Ness on the program not that long ago. You know, he's saying we need the carbon. We need the carbon in the state. We're going to need far more carbon than our state produces. We need to bring it here. What's happening alongside those statements is that, you know, the state of North Dakota is having at times a pretty ugly debate about carbon pipelines, and people just don't want to build them. And it's really hard. I wrote about this recently. It's hard there's been one company that had a very high profile project that really drew a lot of heat. They're taking their project somewhere else now. So that's kind of a moot point. But I worry, like, if we really need all this carbon, I worry about our ability to build this sort of infrastructure that you're talking about, giving some of the public sentiment out there. I've always seen the EERC as your role is essentially to develop facts, to do research, develop information that can inform that debate. So as you're watching this play out about carbon pipelines, what is the EERC's role in all that?
It's to provide the facts with respect to safety record. It's to provide the facts with respect to impact. It's to provide those to policymakers to utilize, to provide those to our industry partners to utilize in public dialogue. It's to provide those facts so that it can. There's a lot of misinformation that's out there, so trying to debunk some of that misinformation and help people make informed decisions.
Well, let's roll through some of that. Like one of the things I'm hearing is that the carbon pipelines are like inherently dangerous. Which, when I think about all the different types of pipelines we have and all the materials, I mean, right up to the lines that bring, you know, gas into our homes for our furnaces and whatnot. I have a hard time believing that, like, carbon pipelines are inherently dangerous. Especially, we've been running a carbon pipeline in Western North Dakota for decades. So talk to that a little bit. I mean, people are saying, oh, carbon pipe, they're going to explode. The carbon gas is going to choke people to death. Respond to some of that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's interesting. I have a carbon tank behind me. This fire extinguisher is full of carbon dioxide. It's what we use to put out in fire extinguishers, put out fires. So it's actually not an explosive gas. So there's a lot of misinformation about exactly what it is. It is typically, when we transport CO2, we transport it under pressure. So it might be higher pressure, but the things that would be concerned with is not explosion. It would be extreme cold. That would be the primary issue with respect to carbon dioxide. If there is no wind in a low-lying area, it can displace air, and that would lead to problems. That is very unlikely scenario, but that is an issue that needs to be handled as far as the pipeline is concerned. That's not dissimilar from some other types of hydrocarbon gases that are more dense than air. If they're transported, they can pool the same way, except for they are explosive. So we transport things in a number of different ways in this country. We transport them by truck, by train, by pipeline. And by far, the safest way to transport large amounts of liquids and gases is in pipelines. So you compare, would you rather have hundreds of trucks on the road or trains running through with these different types of things, or would you rather have it in a pipeline, which is the safest means of transport? So there's some discussion there. I'm not sure if I exactly answered your question, though.
Yeah, no, I think you did. And let me ask you this question. What happens if we don't get the carbon? If some of the infrastructure you were talking about earlier to capture the carbon, to transport it to where it's needed by pipeline or what have you, what happens if that just doesn't get built for whatever reason? What happens with our number one industry in the state?
It'll decline. So we're at 1.2 million barrels of oil per day. We have drilled out most of the prime acreage in the Bakken Formation at this point. We're going to tier 2 and tier 3, and we continue to innovate and figure out ways to produce more oil, but without recharging the formation with energy. We are going to see that production drop. So if we don't, we will see in a decade or two our production go from over 1 million barrels a day down to hundreds of thousands of barrels a day, and eventually to just a dwindle. That today at $100 barrel of oil, that is $12 million a day in tax revenue. Today at 1.2 million barrels of oil at $100 a barrel is $12 million a day in tax revenue. So you think about that, if we cut that in half, right, then now you're at 6 million at today's price. Of course, I hope oil doesn't stay at $100 a barrel for extended periods of time. But, even at $70 a barrel, we're talking a massive amount of money. It's over half of the income to the state of North Dakota that pays for K through 12, pays for roads and bridges, pays for property tax relief, and all these things. That will end, or it will be greatly reduced to the point where we have to scale back these services. So when we think about trying to maintain our quality of life, conservation of resources, producing the oil that we've already found instead of going to some other location, probably not in North Dakota, to drill a new well. I would rather produce the oil here in the United States in North Dakota out of a well that we've already found, already drilled, and without massive amounts of carbon dioxide. That's just not going to happen. And, just to circle back to one of your questions earlier, you said, well, what about these other methods? They're absolutely going to be helpful. Surfactants, I mentioned the soap idea. That's a fantastic idea. It's one that could be used in concert with CO2. Produced gas is another one. But just to put it into context, if we took every single molecule of produced gas that we get out of the Bakken today, it would be a losing battle from an energy perspective. And it's just simple math. When we produce a barrel of oil, we also produce 1 part water and 1 part gas. We can call them, just for easy math, let's just say they're roughly a third, a third, a third. If we take the water, we re-inject it into another horizon, we dispose of that water, we sell the oil, and then we capture and sell that gas. So if we put all that back to work, we're still down 1 part, or actually 2 parts, with the water and also the oil. We're still down 2 parts. So you think about it, we want to have that energy back in the formation. Enhanced oil recovery is about bringing that energy back in through injection of fluid. And then it's also how that fluid mixes. You could think, well, we've got lots of water. Why don't we just use water? Water and oil don't mix. This is kind of the idea with the soap. So if you want to get more water or oil out of the ground, you can use water to build that pressure up, and that'll probably be part of the solution, maybe with surfactants mixed in, but it's not going to be enough. And again, to get back to that, if we're trying to replace hundreds of thousands of barrels per day of production, we need things like millions of tons of CO2 going into the ground.
And one thing that I found interesting from the talk yesterday is that this kind of goes back to that why is it taking so long question, is that depending on the life of the well, when you're at in the life cycle of the well, really has impacts on how much oil you can, the additional oil that you can recover. And there's this balance that you're still trying to figure out with the research. Can you talk just a little bit about that?
Yeah, and a lot of our research indicates the earlier we try enhanced oil recovery, the better. Before it gets too pressure depleted, before we draw down the pressure, it's better to start our enhanced oil recovery process, whether it be produced gas or CO2. And we're already later in the game now, so it just takes more energy to reinvigorate that formation. The oil's still there. Most of it's still there. The big challenge with the Bakken and how it's different than our conventional fields, we have to reinvigorate our conventional fields too. I kind of alluded to it earlier in the panel. I said it. We've already produced almost 2 billion barrels out of our conventional fields. These are easier to do enhanced oil recovery in, and we're already doing them in Bowman County in North Dakota. Been working on enhanced oil recovery there in the Cedar Hills field. So that is happening. CO2 has been running since 2000 through from the Dakota Gasification Facility up into Weyburn, Canada. Over 45 million tons of CO2 has been injected for enhanced oil recovery there safely, without incident, by the way, right through North Dakota, without many people even being aware that is happening. Not that it's being hidden by any means, but there has been no issue, is really more my point. And improving out the technology in conventional fields. And so it's a different kind of rock. So if I really go into the weeds, from a conventional field, we're more like sweeping. We're pushing something into the ground and it's sweeping through the rock, pushing oil out of the ground, pushing it to a production well. In the Bakken, we're looking at something that is so tight, so dense. The only way that we can produce it, which is why it took us so long to figure it out, is through a horizontal well that goes miles, 1, 2, 3, 4 miles long horizontally, and then hydraulically fracturing. So that's putting cracks into this rock. If you think about it, a conventional reservoir is like a paver stone on your patio. If you pour a glass of water on it, it just runs right through it. The Bakken is like a slate countertop. And you pour a glass of water on it and it pools up, runs off the edge and onto the floor, right? So the oil is inside that slate countertop. So the only way we're going to be able to produce that is by cracking it, or in this case, we're hitting it with a hydraulic fracture job to big cracks in it because the oil is locked inside that countertop. And that's a big part of the difference. So now how do you get the CO2 or whatever it is in there? And that's exactly the thing that we're working on. It's not a flushing and sweeping mechanism. There's other mechanisms at play.
Well, Charlie, I certainly appreciate your time coming on Plain Talk today. Enjoy the rest of the conference. And I think we're all looking forward to seeing what the future cracking the code is. And hopefully we're going to crack it soon. But appreciate your time.
Thanks, Charlie.
Today's program is sponsored by the North Dakota Association of Rural Electric Cooperatives, representing locally owned electric co-ops that power homes, farms, and businesses across rural North Dakota. Electric cooperatives are committed to reliable, affordable energy and strengthening the communities they serve. Learn more at ndarec.com.
North Dakota Farmers Union.
North Dakota Farmers Union makes family farming and ranching their business. So while you're working hard, Farmers Union is working just as hard to address issues that impact your bottom line. Everything from high input costs and trade tariffs to market concentration and a new farm bill. Farmers Union is the organization led by and for family farmers and ranchers. If you aren't already a member, join them at ndfu.org.
North Dakota Farmers Union.
This episode is presented by Recovery Centers of Montana.
If you or someone you know is struggling, getting help shouldn't feel out of reach.
Recovery Centers of Montana offers care across 6 locations, including inpatient facilities and outpatient clinics.
Step away from the noise and focus on getting your life back on track.
Learn more by calling 701-401-3000.
That's 701-401-3000.
Welcome back. Just finished up with Charlie Gorecki, CEO of the UND-EERC, which Allison is just a valuable resource in our state.
Isn't he great? He's so wonderful. I've known Charlie for a really, really long time, and he's a kind, caring, but really smart person. And thankfully, we have a lot of really smart people at the EERC to help us advance energy and all sorts of energy in our state, from oil and gas to even rare earth elements. He's incredible.
Well, we have a crisis really when it comes to a lot of these issues, and it's not because you're at the Williston Basin Petroleum Conference, which by the way I hear is going gangbusters this year. I think you were telling me towards the break they actually had to turn people away.
That's
Couldn't
what
get
I heard
in the room
yesterday. You never know, but I mean it's packed. It really is packed, and I got here what I thought was fairly early yesterday, and I had to park like a mile away. I mean, this is the premier oil and gas conference to be at, and I can say that because I used to help plan it, so I take a little pride in being part of its history. But it really is. I mean, when you get speakers from undersecretaries for the Department of Energy and our Department of Interior, Doug Burgum, he's speaking today. I actually may have just missed it, but it's the conference that everyone wants to be at, and it's packed and it's full of information.
It really is. And again, but getting back to the ERC too, we have a crisis where we're trying to have debates about everything, and we just can't get to a shared set of facts. And there's disinformation out there. There's people who make things up. AI is here now, generating content that, may or may not be representative of the truth. And it's really, really hard. And I think it makes an institution like EERC all the more important, where they're here in North Dakota. They can speak to North Dakota specific questions, our unique geology, our unique economic situation, our unique, even all the things that make North Dakota what it is. They can speak to it, and they can produce some facts to help inform the debates that we have about things like data centers or
carbon pipelines,
or how to, or even beyond carbon, how to get more oil or keep the oil oil activity going for as long as we can. And also even up to, we talked a little bit and, the interview will be coming out, or the show will be coming out, later this week. But even like nuclear, like is nuclear a right fit for North Dakota? And if we did nuclear in North Dakota, what would we do for the waste? Which would be a hugely important question for public debate. I remember not that long ago, the EERC wanted to do a test borehole near Rugby, and to test, maybe help answer the question, would it be viable to store nuclear waste that way in North Dakota? Well, the public didn't even want to do the test borehole.
No.
The backlash was enormous.
And if I recall correctly, having conversations, because this was years and years ago, but actually, it wasn't so much the borehole. If I recall, it was actually testing the bit to see if it could drill.
Is that what it was?
Yeah,
Okay.
that if it, I'm pretty sure. It's been years now, but
Well, I know they wanted to
it's
drill
still
a borehole.
Yeah, they wanted to drill a hole, but they also wanted to test the bit, the strength of the bit,
Right.
to see if it could actually drill through the material. I mean, it was just purely research, but people hear the term nuclear and they get really scared. And, our state's actually looking at, can we do nuclear here? If we do nuclear, will there be communities that are accepting of it? And they're asking those questions now because, I mean, it's maybe not 10 years from now, but it certainly could be in our future. And those are all things that we need to consider. I think North Dakota is at a point where we need to keep moving the ball forward. Or if we don't, we're going to fall backwards. We're going to start losing population. We're going to lose jobs. We're going to lose that economic viability that we've come to appreciate and rely on in many, many cases. Property tax credits, that's paid for by the oil and gas industry, but through the legacy fund. And so we need to keep advancing technology. One thing that we didn't get to talk to Charlie about, but that they have been studying at the EERC for years, is if we're going to do enhanced oil recovery, we need to be able to store the carbon dioxide if we get to that point. And they've been studying storage of carbon dioxide for decades. And through PCOR, through the Plains CO2 recovery. And so that's been done. And there's materials out there, and there's education, and there is research that has been done to show that it can be done safely.
That's the thing. I work in the world of politics. So to me, it's always about what's the public going to tolerate. And right now, it feels like at least a very active and very vocal portion of the public is very much against just about everything right now. And I mean, there's probably larger trends that we could talk about: the loss of faith in our institutions, the loss of faith in academic, the role of social media and maybe amplifying fringe voices and allowing them to gain traction. There's a lot of stuff going on there. But what I really worry, and I've been writing about this recently, Alice, I don't know if you've read it about it at all. I'd like to get your opinion though. I have argued, some years ago, probably in the early days of the oil boom, we were talking about North Dakota being open for business. This maybe was around circa 2008, 2009. We saw a lot of what was happening nationally with like the housing, the mortgage, subprime mortgage collapse, all that stuff. And North Dakota was a real place of opportunity. And we were advertising ourselves as being open for business. Come here, do business, start businesses, come here and work, fill our available jobs. And it was correct at the time. But it feels like the worms turned on that a little bit, where when we look at, and I'm not saying, I want to be very careful because I don't want to make it sound like there's no good reason to be skeptical of a data center, or there's no good reason to be skeptical of a pipeline. There are compelling arguments on that side. Generally, I'm supportive of these things, but I mean, we can have an honest, good faith debate. But there's a lot of people that it doesn't matter what the project is. It doesn't matter what the proposal is. It doesn't matter what the details is. You say data center, they're against it. You say carbon pipeline, or maybe any pipeline, they're against it. You say transmission line, and they're against it. And how do we build in that environment?
You're not wrong. I sat on a panel at the Lignite Energy Council's annual meeting last November, and that question was posed: is North Dakota closed for business? And I sat on that panel with Ron Ness and Eric Spencer of the Greater North Dakota Chamber, and they would say that and said that the politics in our state has changed tremendously, where there are leaders that are elected that are not receiving great grades from the North Dakota Chamber because they're not business friendly. And I think that's going to be even more important here coming up in the primary in June, is that we are electing people that recognize that there are economic opportunities in the state, but we can still do it and still do those things and maintain what we love about living in North Dakota. And I think the Bakken is a shining example of that, having worked at the state's oil and gas division when there were tremendous challenges with growing and producing oil here at home. And we've come through it, and we've come through it where we've created environments and we've created towns and cities where people want to live and work while still producing things that the nation needs. And I think that data centers can be no different. And I think building transmission lines and additional power generation can be no different. We can still have those things and still be the great North Dakota that we love.
I think what you just said about there being a challenge to keep North Dakota oil and gas production going, I don't think a lot of people in the public understand that. I don't think they
No.
know that story.
No.
And I think in fact they take our oil and gas activity and our coal activity and all the other great things we do, even our agriculture. I think they take it for granted. I think they think it's going to continue forever, no matter what. So we don't need to do these other things. We don't need to innovate these things. We don't need to build it. We're just fine. We can say no, and everything will just keep going. And that's just not true. That's not our story. That's not what got us to where we're at now. And it's certainly not going to get us to where we want to go in the future.
Well, I did kind of quip about the landman, the story in Landman where the oil industry is too big to fail. To a degree, that's true, but they have to put a lot of time and energy and effort into cracking the code, into accomplishing the additional oil recovery. But they can't get there, essentially, if the public isn't on board either. If the public doesn't realize that we have to build an end use for the products that we are producing. So why not build that end use here? Why not benefit from those end uses here, where then not only oil production and coal production can continue to thrive and create jobs and create communities where people want to live, but also produce things that the rest of the world is reliant on.
You know, I was talking, if we drill down a little bit about the Summit project in particular, I think it's really unfortunate that was sort of, for most North Dakotans, that was kind of their introduction to the question of carbon pipelines. And the company, I think, while I supported, the mission, I support the concept, I like it. I think the company did itself and the state of North Dakota a real disservice in the way they handled things. I mean, when I have talked to a lot of people whose land was going to be on the route. They were approached by Summit. Some of them had good experiences.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them had terrible experiences.
That's what I heard too.
Aggressive tactics. I was talking to a friend who said her grandfather's land was along and she was her grandfather's representative. And she says, I'm not against the pipelines, but I'm against that company because they came and basically told me, well, listen, if you don't sign up, we're going to get your land. We're going to get your land. We're going to do it anyway. Sending surveyors onto their land without asking permission. I mean, just some really basic stuff where if you hadn't chosen to go about your business that way, you might have had an ally instead of an enemy. They came in, they made a ton of enemies. The old saying is you never get a second chance at a first impression. I worry about the first impression that North Dakotans got of carbon pipelines. I worry about that and what that means for our ability for that whole area of policy and industry. I worry about what that future is now.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And I guess to that point is that there are good actors and bad actors in every industry.
Yep. Sure,
and,
absolutely.
And we're gonna see that. I think with data centers, I know that it hasn't been perfect in North Dakota. There's been some issues with the data center.
We have Applied Digital that I think has done a very good job.
Great job.
Allendale.
Yes.
But then you have the one, I'm forgetting the company's name, but the one
There's
that
one
built in Williston that
Right.
I think was done really poorly. And again, very sort of dismissive of the people who live by it, when they had complaints about lights or noise or what have you. That one was probably done poorly.
And there's good actors and bad actors. And I had a conversation with a company just yesterday here at the conference that they're trying to expand their operations in North Dakota. And they said, what advice can you give us? And I said, be in the community. Don't just be a fly by night. Don't just try to strong arm people into what you want to do. You need to incorporate and be in the community. And I think that's true no matter what industry you're looking at. And from the sounds of it, that's not how Summit went. And it doesn't sound like North Dakota is unique, because obviously a lot of the pushback on the carbon pipeline was in South Dakota,
Iowa. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And so good actors and bad actors. So if we have another company come in, they are going to have an uphill challenge. But the thing that organizations like mine need to do is to help spread the message as to, and even the EERC, as to why, provide factual information as to why these projects are needed. And if you say no to it, this is what you're saying no to. This is the outcome that could possibly happen, that we lose tax revenue. I mean, oil and gas industry provides a tremendous amount of revenue towards our state. And if that goes away, then what do we use to fund things? We like nice roads. We like having hospitals. We like having schools that do well. And so if we say no to those additional industries coming in, then we lose out on so many things. Now, I'm not just saying that it's a blanket yes, right? We had our annual infrastructure roundtable in Watford City a few weeks ago. And the point of my organization is to give people an educated yes, to help them understand the benefits that can come from it, but that we can do it in a measured way. The Bakken is a perfect example of that. We've had challenges, and yes, it took a while to get through it. There's growing pains, but we come through it better on the other side.
It's I really think our state, I think one of the big challenges of the legislative session coming up, we need to write some policies that find the right balance between, because when you're building a pipeline, you're going to be touching on hundreds, maybe thousands of property owners, depending, I guess, on how long it is. And not everybody along there, I mean, some of them are just going to say no because they want to say no.
Right.
They're not really going to have a good argument. I mean, the best pipeline company in the world that's doing the most it can to respect is still going to run into people who just don't want it.
Yeah. I was actually at the Capitol, and I overheard a gal having a conversation. I believe she was in and around Emmons County. And she was proud of the fact that she has said no to transmission lines, pipelines. I think I heard her say she said no to 6 different projects. And that's entirely her right. But if we have an entire state that says that, we are never going to get anywhere, and we're going to go
Not even an
backwards.
entire state. I mean, if you just have a meaningful minority, they can gridlock. And that's where things like eminent domain comes in. Nobody likes to use that word. I don't
No.
like to use that word. But we have to balance the public's need for this infrastructure.
I was sad to hear her say that. I
Yeah.
mean, she was fine turning down the additional revenue for her family, and again, that's her choice. But I was sad to hear her say that, because her choice also impacts a lot of people, and it impacts a lot of things. And by saying no, I mean, selfishly, want my kids to stay in North Dakota and live and work in North Dakota. And that is the wish, and had been the wish for a lot of people in our state for a very long time, because children were out migrating. They were not living here. They were not providing and keeping the quality of life that we have. They were gone. And then now they're coming back, and the Bakken provided that opportunity. I want those same opportunities for my children, and we're not going to have that if everybody says no, but it has to be an educated yes, and why that matters.
It's gonna get, I'm afraid it's gonna get harder and harder before it gets better. And I worry about us getting left behind because we can't build here anymore. And I really think that's where the legislature could step in when it comes to, say, data centers. Maybe we need to define in the law what does a good data center project look like? What do we expect out of it? What are the guardrails? One concern I have about data centers is I don't want my energy prices to go up.
Right.
I don't want to pay for it in my electric bill. You know, the data center company can pay their power bill. I don't want to pay their power bill. So
And
how can we
that's
write?
well, I think that's electing smart people at the PSC
Right.
that understand making good business decisions.
But I
That
also
you
think it
can't
means
just say,
it means writing it into law. Like I don't think we should have to rely on companies to be good actors or bad actors. I think we
Yeah.
can write a policy to ensure the people who get through the door, who get to cross the finish line and build their projects, are good actors.
Well, but we can't overregulate either. I'm gonna
No,
push back on you
right.
a little bit there. That we, I always love Governor Burgum's saying that innovation over regulation, right? Because
Sure.
we don't want to overregulate to the point where we completely close ourselves off for business, but
No,
finding that balance, right?
I
Like,
think that's fair, and I don't think that's what I'm asking for, though.
yeah.
Is overregulation. But I think there needs to be something, if for no other reason than to give the public some confidence that when this project gets built, these are the guardrails. Like this is the path that we want these projects to follow.
Well, to that point, I said we have a lot of really smart people at the EERC, and I think we have a
Sure.
lot of really smart people in state government as well. We have Reese Haas running the Water Commission. We have Dave Glatt. Sadly, he's retiring, but I know he's established a great team at the Department of Environmental Quality, and so they're already watching data centers for water usage and what the consumption means for the state and how to properly regulate that. Dave Glatt and his team are looking at air quality and what can we do there. And so North Dakota has always been great about innovating
Yeah.
and leading the way in some things. And I caution people about, with data centers, getting your information off Facebook, which
Oh.
is hilarious because this is going to probably be posted to Facebook and YouTube. But
Yeah.
but we have really smart people here in the state that are willing to answer your questions that are accessible, and that they'll tell you what the facts are.
I think maybe a better way, people need to scrutinize what they're seeing on Facebook. I don't know. First of all, it's hilarious. I don't know that there is anybody in the state of North Dakota posting more AI generated content to social media than the people who, I posted this the other day, than the people who are opposed to data centers. That is
Okay.
hilarious, because where do you think all that, when you're generating a new meme or something about data centers, that's being created in a data center.
Yeah,
That's kind of funny.
there's a misunderstanding about what data centers are. I think
They could be lots
that-
of things. They could be an
They
AI
could-
data center, but they can also
Right.
be just storage where they're storing like all the family photos you have up in the cloud or whatever.
Someone said to me, well, we don't need them. Why do we need them? I take a ton of pictures of my kids, and I like to back those up, to have
Mhm.
those someday, and that's got to be backed up somewhere. And so I keep paying more and more, because guess what? I'm using more and more data to store it. And so people don't realize the data they're using, but just, medical equipment, ag equipment, agriculture, precision agriculture,
Podcasts.
podcasts. I mean, it's surrounding us every single day. It's not just AI that's going to
Yeah.
take over our
Well,
life.
that's what I mean. These data centers get built, and basically they're infrastructure. They're places that have the cooling and the power and everything else they need to put in essentially supercomputers. And boy, what a dated term that is, but really, really fancy computers that can do all sorts of things. It could be storage, it could be AI processing, it could be website hosting, it could be video conferencing, all the different things. We need data centers. We're all using this stuff every day. We all need it. I will say, though, getting back to like getting information from Facebook, there are a lot of Facebook groups that are popping up around like the carbon issues or the data center issues. I mean, you'll see them pop up. They're posting memes and stuff. They're getting all these likes. They're putting the message out there. And part of me is like, well, who's running them?
Yeah.
Where are these Facebook groups? There's no real good way to tell.
And I
Uh,
often wonder, the people who are commenting on my things on social media, if they're actual real people. One
Yeah.
thing that I do when I see something on social media, I immediately get off of Facebook and try to Google to see if it's true.
like
And
primary sources.
honestly, like 9 times out of 10, it's not true. And
Yeah.
so I try to trust but verify. But at the same time, I live near a data center. I had no idea. I live like 3 blocks from a data center. Not a clue. That's how there's so many different types of data centers. But also just bringing it back to that, I never thought I would be talking about data centers when I took this position, but it does have to do with what I do, right? Because if we don't continue to produce oil and gas and have the end users to use that product, then so much changes in our state. And if we don't build additional transmission lines, if we don't build additional power generation, so much changes in our state.
Well, that's what I like data set, because obviously I use the internet. I'm using these things. We need them. There's customers for them. The market says we need them. I want them to be built here in America and not other places. So there's that. But there's also the fact that North Dakota produces a hell of a lot of energy. And we've all seen the fights over our fights with Minnesota, where they don't want our coal-fired electricity anymore. That's just one example. Or where they want to decarbonize. They don't want North Dakota. Way back in the day, remember we didn't have the Dakota Access Pipeline. We were shipping so much oil by rail, and all of a sudden, some of our fellow Americans on the West Coast didn't want our oil coming out there by rail, and they had local counties trying to pass moratoriums to block the oil trains, got the whole bomb train things, which
I was there during that.
was very frustrating to watch. And although at root, a real issue, we'd had some explosions and that needed to be addressed. And it got addressed. You'll notice we're not talking about bomb trains anymore because it got addressed.
Yeah, those are the challenges we had to overcome.
So those are the struggles. But when we build things like data centers in North Dakota, we're creating customers for the energy. So not only do we get the data center, and I think the the Harwood data center by itself is going to employ a few hundred people. That's a big deal. That's a big employer.
Well, I'm glad you brought that one up too, because the other thing that it's doing is it's providing necessary upgrades to the grid. And I think that and they are paying for it. The company Applied Digital is paying like $100 and some million to upgrade grid systems. And I think what people are missing is we're actually at this breaking point in our electricity system that upgrades are needed. And it's coming at a point where
because everybody wants electrical everything.
Well, but upgrades are needed. And so those were taking place naturally, which consumers were seeing the cost, right? At the same time that demand was coming from data centers. And so they're kind of equating that cost from the data center to the actual necessary upgrades that were needed on the lines that like, let's just put it this way. If you've got a 15-year-old dishwasher, eventually you're going to need a new dishwasher, right? And we're at a point where we need a lot more dishwashers in our country, and it's coming into a time when we're also having to produce a lot more power. And so they're kind of getting confused.
Yeah. We were using, even without data centers, American demand for power was growing. They just put up a Tesla charging station like 2 blocks from my house. I never thought I'd see one in Minot, but sure enough, there it is.
Oh, there's one in Bismarck.
And I'm glad it's here. If electric cars work for you, that's great. That's the free market. I'm not here to tell people.
Yeah, my brother loves electric cars, and
I'm not buying one yet. It doesn't work for my family. Not because I'm against them. It doesn't work for my family yet. But maybe one day. I don't know.
He's not an environmentalist. He just thinks they're cool. And so he was like, I want to get a Tesla.
Which, by the way, our environmentalist friends, I think if it was a lot more about telling people that they have to sacrifice and more just like pointing out to them ways where they could save themselves money, I think they would have gotten a lot more traction over the years. Anyway, on that note, we're going to end. Allison, thank you so much for sitting in this week. I really appreciate it.
This was so fun, Rob. I knew we were going to have a good time because you and I go way back. And so it's fun that we could actually ask the questions together and work together, as opposed to me just being like, Rob.
As opposed to you like responding to my open records requests and stuff like that. Yeah, it's a different dynamic now.
But you know what? You and I have always been friends, and I've really appreciated that.
Yeah, certainly. I really appreciate you coming on. And sorry for the confusion last week for our audience as I tried to defat myself and then ran into some. Hey, I was doing too good, too much, too fast.
Positively about yourself. You are improving yourself. You are making yourself better.
I hope so. I think I'm heading
and your family. You're doing.
I think I'm heading the right direction. Eventually, somebody's gonna make a fat joke about me on social media, and I'm gonna be able to say, "Oh, not anymore.
No,
not anymore." All right, we're gonna put a pin in it there. Thank you so much for everybody for listening. Plain Talk ND is the place to go for Plain Talk ND. That's our handle on all the social media things: TikTok, Facebook, Twitter. I don't know what else. Instagram. It's all out there. PlainTalkND.com takes you to our YouTube page, which is a great way to engage in the show. We got all our clips there. We have the interviews and the commentary broken down. You could subscribe to our YouTube channel and get all the new content as it comes out. But once again, thank you so much for listening. Oh, and I forgot, by the way, if you want to call and leave a voicemail, 701-587-3141. You can do that. You can leave us a voicemail. You can send that number a text and we'll engage with it on the show. We actually have a great voicemail from Representative Jamie Davis about the redistricting issue. I would have played it on this show, but this was kind of a big energy show and I didn't want to, that's a very important issue and she made points and I want to bring it on. We'll certainly address that on an earlier show. Thank you once again so much for listening, and we'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. I try to defat myself.
Hi, I'm Megan Invick with Americans for Prosperity North Dakota. One of the cornerstones of our Road to Opportunity agenda is tax relief, because North Dakotans deserve to keep more of what they earn. That's why we're advocating for the elimination of the state income tax, along with meaningful property tax relief tied to responsible local spending. Learn more about the Road to Opportunity and our plan to eliminate the state income tax at afpnd.org.
The North Dakota oil and natural gas industry works here, and works here, and here, and even works here, by creating 60,000 jobs statewide and generating billions of tax dollars annually to support our infrastructure, flood protection projects, and our schools. North Dakota oil and natural gas, advancing the possibilities.
Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org.
This episode is presented by Recovery Centers of Montana.
If you or someone you know is struggling, getting help shouldn't feel out of reach.
Recovery Centers of Montana offers care across 6 locations, including inpatient facilities and outpatient clinics.
Step away from the noise and focus on getting your life back on track.
Learn more by calling 701-401-3000.
That's 701-401-3000.